Hi everyone, and welcome to our series of bite-sized webinars on home working. I'm Ed Mills. I head up the employment and business immigration team at Travers Smith, and I'm joined by Doug Bryden, who heads up our risk and operational regulatory team. And today, in the first of our series, we're going to focus on the health and safety side of home working. Now, many of us have been working from home for months now, and frankly, this looks set to continue as the new normal for the foreseeable future in some shape or form. And most of us were thrust into home working at the start of lockdown with little or no time to prepare. But lots of clients, and indeed us at Travers Smith, are now taking the opportunity to regularise their home working arrangements, think about their systems and processes, and perhaps tidy things up a little bit. So with that in mind, we wanted to bring you a short series of webinars on the employment law and health and safety aspects of home working. These will be Q&A style, focusing on the top FAQs. And today we are focusing on the health and safety aspects. What are employers' obligations and what does this look like in practice? And in future sessions, we'll be looking at things such as equipment and expenses, who pays for these and what are the tax implications, and some wider employment considerations like confidentiality and data protection and staff mental health and well-being. So jumping straight into it, Doug, thanks very much for joining us today. Could you please start by reminding us briefly about what the latest government guidance says on working from home?
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks, Ed. Just before I do that, just a quick reminder on what the government guidance is about, kind of working more generally, and just it's been, still clearly the case, both in guidance and in the law, that you really should be working home where it is possible. So that means for the majority of kind of office-based staff, that home working is the kind of recommended or required kind of working pattern. Interestingly, we've just had communications out from Boris Johnson, which is indicating they're looking now to start to reverse that and start to more positively encourage people to get back into the workplace. But as it stands, it is going to be home working for a large number of people for some time still to come. To facilitate that, the government actually put out quite a lot of guidance on how you should approach it, and that ranges from the provision of equipment through to health and safety considerations, as well as other types of concerns which might arise. In addition to the government guidance, and we would strongly recommend people looking at this, is the trade body guidance from the like of APAS, or the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, who have provided helpful, tailored templates, guidance documents, ranging from questionnaires through to policies and codes of practice.
Excellent, thanks, Doug. So it sounds like there's a lot of stuff out there, but I suppose almost going back a stage, in terms of health and safety, in general terms, what actually is the employer's obligation here, and does that obligation extend to home working?
In short, the two are the same. An employer has a duty or has an obligation to manage the health and safety of its workforce, and then to take reasonable steps in doing that. And there's no real distinction at law or in the guidance between a home worker or a person who's actually in the formal place of work.
Now, one of the questions we get asked a lot, and I guess it's become more topical as a general point, given that lots of businesses are gearing up to reopen their workplaces, and obviously there's a lot in the government guidance in those respects around risk assessments. But the question obviously in this context is, do employers have to carry out a risk assessment for their employees who are working from home?
That is a great question, and I think the answer is probably kind of developed over time. I think at the beginning of the lockdown, in a more traditional temporary basis, where this isn't a kind of a perceived long-term or permanent arrangement of home working, then the full weight or body of obligations, steps that employers have to take did not apply. So initially, did you need to do a full work assessment? No. But I think what's clear is it is for a number of people looking like a longer term setup. So I think we are now advising, and have been for the last month or so, that assessments should be undertaken, and they should not be kind of too light either. They should be fairly detailed. And the reason we're saying that, it's not us being kind of overly risk averse. The HSE has picked up on this point and has stated very clearly that they will not shy away from enforcement where they believe that risk assessments should have been undertaken but haven't. So yes, we're thinking that risk assessments should now be done.
And you touched on the sense that they should be relatively detailed. Can you add a bit more colour to that? What should a risk assessment look like? And I guess as a linked question, are there any particular risks employers should be mindful of?
Yeah, I think maybe detail is the wrong word. It might be that I think they should be documented, and I think they need to be proportionate. So what we are generally advocating is that an online survey for the majority of workforce, which provides guidance and allows the employer to understand what the risks are and the challenges, and maybe develop its policies and procedures, is going to be sensible. The key there really is to ensure that there's some form of documentation. The more detailed ones we do recommend, though, where you have maybe more vulnerable home workers, be it disability, pregnancy, or some other challenge, that in those cases, yeah, a more detailed one probably is recommended. Does it need to be done with a kind of a suitably qualified person there? Maybe not. It can all be proportionate. So we don't think they need to look overly elaborate. Simplicity sometimes is best in these situations. And again, there are some very helpful guidance documents out there. That's both by the HSE as well as ACAS and others. So we would recommend taking those templates and using them and adopting them. On risks, yes, I think where we are now, the majority of people who are still remain home working are office based, so the risks are going to be fairly limited, but they won't be particularly different to being in the office itself. So it'll be workstation setup, the ergonomics, and that'll be really getting at people's postures, back damage, hand and wrists, as well as eye damage as well. One additional point, though, which is probably not typical in a kind of an office-based scenario, though, is the kind of need to focus on stress, isolation, and kind of some of the mental well-being. I think given the unique circumstances of COVID-19 and the obvious challenges it's posing for everyone, that is an area where not only are we recommending it, but again, the HSE have specifically identified it as an area of assessment and risk mitigation.
Yeah, really good point, and obviously, a topic that is one that, as an employment lawyer, me and my team are considering a lot. The whole sort of mental health time bomb, I suppose, that some people have referred to in respect of this ongoing period of lockdown and the sort of stress that goes with it. So I think it's absolutely right that a risk assessment assessing health and safety should focus on those areas as well. I think also people will be heartened to hear that typically this would not involve someone from an in-house or outsourced health and safety team barging into someone's house and effectively carrying out a physical risk assessment. It sounds like in most cases this can be conducted by way of an online or other type of questionnaire, which I think is good. One subject that you haven't touched on yet, but I know is sort of particularly pertinent, again, particularly for office workers, but probably for most workers these days, is people working from home using laptops or other forms of computer. Any additional obligations for employers around these?
Yeah, I think where you have a display screen, there are some kind of specifics around the assessment, but that can be wrapped into the risk assessment being done, and this can be online as well. So yes, that is one thing, but again, not really that different to the office scenario. One question we get asked a lot is around kind of the product liability angle. So not strictly health and safety, but kind of risks or liabilities arising from, say, faulty equipment going home. there is an obligation that it needs to be fit and proper. I would say in nearly all cases that will be very easy to kind of discharge, as most people, when they're being provided with office equipment, it's either new or it's kind of being issued and tested. If people are buying equipment, most people are saying buy good stuff. You know, they'll normally point them in the right direction, not the kind of maybe cheap replicas or alternatives. But yeah, I see that as probably a lower risk. Where the equipment is slightly more specialized, it could be older, and we've had some lab technicians taking home slightly more kind of energy dependent equipment. And we have recommended in those cases that specific testing is done before it goes into the home environment. And it all wraps into a slightly wider question. People should, if they are particularly doing the slightly more risky or higher kind of equipment focused home working, their home insurance policies might want to be checked to make sure there's no carve-outs or caveats in there.
Good point indeed. And just sticking with equipment, and hopefully we're going to sort of touch on this in one of our upcoming sessions in a bit more detail. But question we often get asked is, does the employer have to provide the equipment? And if so, how does that change things?
Oh yeah, and that is kind of a key question we get asked. The starting point under the kind of the legislation and guidance as it currently is that there is no clear obligation to provide home equipment. It's very much more a commercial business efficacy kind of worker relations point. But you know, for the majority of staff home working, they won't be able to do their job properly unless they have some level of equipment provided. Could just be software, but typically it would be a laptop or something. So yes, there is kind of no general obligation, but people are doing it just to make it work. It would be pretty nonsensical not to at least provide the core equipment. I mean, where it comes up is where people are starting to ask for kind of additional equipment, be it stand-up desks, for example, special chairs. Now, in a lot of cases, they can just ship or move the equipment they have in the kind of the office to their home. But the care needs to be taken here, and it's kind of Ed, back to you in an employment point, is that you know reasonable adjustments need to be made from a kind of a Disability Equality Act purpose. So we're seeing people sensibly making allowances for equipment requests. So that's the standard position. We would say that it's been challenged slightly in the COVID scenario, particularly over the last couple of weeks, where again the HSE have been quite vocal around companies needing to provide additional equipment, and they've specifically highlighted to prevent issues around back injury, being hunched over laptops, as some of the examples they've given. So there is kind of a slight move to, you probably will be needing to provide more, but that's more a reflection of the kind of unique circumstances. I mean, one reality also is that as you do more risk assessments, is what we're all deciding is a sensible thing to do, there will be further requests for equipment. But I think employers should not worry about being inundated with very expensive requests. I think the proviso should still be that you can take a proportionate, considered approach to this, where you look at necessity, commerciality, and general proportionality. I don't feel that you have to provide every single request. But as you are, you know, as you kind of realize, there are other issues as well which come out of providing equipment.
No, indeed, and I guess the quid pro quo is, if you are going to provide the equipment, some of it quite expensive, of course there is that additional obligation to make sure that it's fit for purpose, you know, which is an additional burden, I suppose, as well as the cost of providing it. Look, that's fantastic. I'm conscious of time, so thanks very much for all of those insights. Really great. We'll be picking up on some of the equipment points in a bit more detail in our next webinar, which is also going to cover expenses. What are your obligations as the employer there? Also, what are the tax considerations? So do look out for the next in our home working series. But of course, in the meantime, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with either of us. Our contact details should be here below us on this final slide, or indeed pick up with your usual employment department contact. Now, links to a number of the important guidance docs that Doug mentioned have been included on the slides, and they're also on our website. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks also very much to Doug for joining us. Do stay safe, everyone, and goodbye for now. Goodbye.